Welcome back once again to another Robot Wars review. We're still in Series 1 and we're on Heat D, which honestly is kind of wild even by Robot Wars Series 1 standards, which is going to become immediately obvious as it's a heat filled with featherweights, meaning robots that weigh 12 kilograms or less by the show standards. Nowadays I believe it's more like 13 kilograms, but still, these are small. Like, we thought the weights were disparate before. Now we're getting, like, a little ridiculous. Now, first up, they show Vector of Armageddon, who, as far as I know, is the only Series 1 robot that is still actually working. Like, it was driven at RoboNerd, and it weighs in at 10.7 kilograms. It gives me vibes of La Machine. Then there's Crazy Tokyo, who isn't even a featherweight, as it weighs in at, I'm not joking, 3.2 kilograms and isn't even the lightest robot in the heat. Like, are you kidding me? That's close to beetle weight territory. Like, imagine if this thing won. How in the world would this even compete in the grand final? It would just get ran over by like Robot the Bruce or something and just immediately get shattered. Then there's Cunning Plan, which also gives me La Machine vibes, you know, with that simple wedge shape. It's actually a pretty nice looking robot. That comes in weighing at 11.5 kilograms, therefore making it the heaviest robot in the heat! What? Oh my god. I'll be honest, because it and Vector are such similar looking robots, I've gotten them confused before. I mean, yeah, their fundamental shape is different, but they're big, grey boxes. So I have gotten them confused before, I will admit. Then you've got Satan, which looks kind of crazy and probably one of the more fun-looking robots of the heat, and it's weighing in at 10.5 kilograms. Then you've got Bugs, which is just the cutest little thing. It weighs in at 7.3 kilograms, and there's nothing remotely competitive about it, but I love it anyway. Just like how I love the lightest competitor in the competition, the Demolisher, weighing in at 2.9 kilograms. Sure, it's another, grey box, but, it is so quick that it doesn't matter. It still sticks out to me nonetheless. Allegedly, it could make a top speed of 40 miles per hour, which I don't know if it's true, but it's clearly fast enough that it can drive right off in the intro. This thing is so quick and nimble, I love it. I absolutely love it. Anyway, as always, first up is the Gauntlet, which, again, an obstacle course for the Roboteers, with the person who makes the least distance being eliminated. First up was Cunning Plaid, who decides to go through the maze and does so with ease. With a smaller size, it likely is just a lot easier to get through as you're not going to crash into the walls as much. After waiting to see which way Matilda would go, Cunning Plan tries getting past, and it's a struggle, but they make it onto the spikes. Though thankfully this was only a slight delay, as they do end up making it onto the finish line, guaranteeing that they will make it onto the next round. Also, Jonathan Pierce made a joke that Matilda's modelled on his mother, which, hasn't he gone on to make like flirty commentary about Matilda before? I don't know about that one. Then Crazy Tokyo goes up next, racing out into the maze, and while it has a little bit more trouble than Cunning Plan, they do still make it through the maze, and then they decide to actually diverge into the center path to keep away from Matilda. After weaving through the springs, the last one catches them, meaning that Matilda gets to come in for a closer look, and also gets stuck on the springs. Amazing. Crazy Tokyo made it 12.65 meters, which means that they were relatively safe regardless, thankfully. Next up was Satan, and honestly, I actually have come to like their design a lot more. There's only so much you can do with this kind of, weight class, at least if you're fighting heavyweights. So Satan has gone for a more fun design, with sound effects, a laser eye, and smoke coming out of its nose, which I think was really smart of them, because, what are you going to do realistically here? Despite this, they actually choose to take on the house robots in the Gauntlet, and apart from crashing into one of the spike blocks, they actually race right through, getting to the finish line. I'll admit, I didn't think much of Satan's chances, but they did amazingly well given what they were up against, as they guaranteed their chance into the next round. The Demolisher was up next, and again, despite being completely grey, it's got a creative little shape. It's basically just a little car. It zooms along as it comes out in the gauntlet. I thought it would be taken out by Matilda when they crashed into each other, but the Demolisher brushes it off and makes it there faster than I think the other two, despite what the show says. The show claims that it didn't get there as quickly as the others, but with that tiny robot, you cannot convince me that that thing didn't get there in record time. It might have been a case of editing though, maybe it really was really slow getting there, but either way, it's safe and we'll be moving on to the next round. Bugs comes out next, and they're kind of cautious actually. It drives out, then back, then changes course. It does manage to make it past Sergeant Bash and then into Matilda, who just swats them away. Bugs is kind of moving like a shopping trolley, as I believe it actually does have some casters on the front and back, as it just keeps veering and turning, clearly not able to drive properly into a straight line. It struggles to make any more progress and is finished at 11.45 meters. We're down to the final robot now in the gauntlet, as Vector of Armageddon by Adam Clark, who would go on to make 259, is the last one to go. They actually decide to go for the seesaw and make it over with very little issue. Though they do have to toss and turn to get down before heading to the ramp, where unfortunately their low ground clearance, normally a major asset in this kind of competition, is what does them in here, as they get stuck on the ramp. And not only does their run at the gauntlet end here, but their run in the competition as they only make 8.55 meters, which is a massive shame, as it was definitely one of the more competitive looking robots this heat. And given the person who made it, I have a feeling that they could have actually done decently well. Now clearly this isn't much of a heat, as they return to showing footage of the Master by Mark Satrakian versus 4, and again, this fight shows that the head start America gets has given them a chance to have far better robots than anything we're going to see this season in Robot Wars. The Master won that fight and likely would win the entirety of this first series of Robot Wars if it was in the competition. Like, it's such a cool looking robot, honestly. Anyway, we move on to the next event now, which was a race, where the robots have to make 3 loops around the track. Once a robot has made the 3 laps, the loser will be, just like the gauntlet, the robot that makes the least distance. Now right out of the gate, Demolisher actually gets flipped over, but is quickly flipped back and finishes the lap first as they speed along, and then finish a second lap before anyone has even finished a single lap. Cunning Plan then finishes a lap as the Demolisher then bumps a corner and is flipped over. The other robots continue trekking on, but Cunning Plan seems to want to try and help, but is unable to flip them over before getting past the finish line and finishing the race. I got to appreciate the sportsmanship from Cunning Plan though to try and help the Demolisher out. Thankfully for the Demolisher, while they met disaster, with 2 laps they were fine. Crazy Tokyo meanwhile made no laps, and therefore they were the ones eliminated this time around. In an attempt to pad things out even further, because again this heat's a big old load of nothing, they show more footage. This time, instead of American robots in UK, they now show an actual bit of footage from the American Robot Wars competition, where we got to see a big old rumble with Vlad the Impaler, Tazbot, La Machine, Mauler, Biohazard, and so many more in a rumble. In it, the Master loses an arm, La Machine tips 2 robots over, and I think they actually won the entire thing. I wish I got to see the full fight. Honestly, again, this is heads and shoulders above anything we get to see in this series, and really shows that we are seeing like the baby steps of the UK combat scene here. Anyway, thankfully we're now onto the fights, and first up was Cunning Plan versus Bugs. Before the fight, Philippa actually interviews the Cunning Plan builder, and she's far more humorous to me than Jeremy. At least in Robot Wars, she's a lot more suited to that environment. So, I know, sorry, unrelated to the fight, but I've just felt like bringing it up. Anyway, I could tell this fight would be one-sided, given that it's a wedge versus basically a high ground clearance shopping trolley. The fight begins, and Cunning Plan dances around before finally going for a wedge that Bugs actually manages to survive, and then they just drove onto the grill. Deadmel seems to be trying to get it free, but is unable to as the fight is called and Cunning Plan moves on. What a boring fight. Next up, Demolisher versus Saturn. The fight begins and Saturn rushes for Demolisher, who easily dodges them with that speed. Saturn and Demolisher then ram into each other, but don't really do much. Demolisher then has to run from Sergeant Bash, but Saturn actually breaks down. Demolisher nearly gets flipped over by Shunt, but again, luckily, is fine. Matilda then goes and sandwiches Demolisher between it and Saturn and begins lowering that chainsaw tail, which begins cutting into Saturn, but actually gets stopped by Demolisher's metal armor, because, chainsaws really can't do anything to metal as far as I can tell, so yeah. The fight is called and Demolisher is moving on to the main event, and probably the best fight of the entire episode, not counting the American Robot War stuff. I should probably stress that. This is probably the best fight with the actual Heat competitors, because, Matilda got involved with the chainsaw and cut a robot up. Anyway, we move on now to the main event between Demolisher and Cunning Plan. Now the fight starts and Cunning Plan comes in, Demolisher backs away before coming in a bit more cautiously because they know that any mistake and they're done. Cunning Plan then just rushes for Demolisher and flips them up and over easily, the weight difference really making all the difference in the world as they didn't stand a chance. Still, it was a short and unremarkable fight and all, but with just how quickly it went. Overall, it was an episode. It wasn't even the worst episode, as while everyone is basically weaponless, they actually worked a lot better than you'd expect for this season and worked better than some of the heavyweight competitors. It was a major contrast to the other episodes in that the first two rounds were actually the most exciting part though, with the fights just being boring. Quite a difference from the Feathers and Beetles of today, and I think they did them no favours by showing the American robots. Like, it would have been bad enough doing that with the other heats, with the heavyweights, but the fact that you did them with the weaponless, featherweights and basically beetleweights? Unbelievable. Featherweights and beetleweights have come such a long way though. That's another thing. Getting to see the heavyweights of back then really does show you a great contrast with what's around nowadays. And you can see that in this heat as well, because if you watch featherweights and beetleweights in competition nowadays, they're so complex. They're basically scaled down heavyweights. In fact, many heavyweight teams actually use these weight classes to test out new robots. So it's a major shock to the system if you've never seen this episode before, and might be worth it just for that. But again, you probably want to watch some other Robot Wars, some more later on Robot Wars stuff first, before you try watching Series 1. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you hadn't already, and be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified of future videos on the channel. I'm hoping to have the RoboGames video out tomorrow. If not, but it'll hopefully be out by Friday. But if you enjoyed, please be sure to share this video around with your friends as well. If you've seen this episode, comment and let me know what you thought of this episode. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it on Mech Plus. It's entirely free, though you can pay to get rid of the ads. And with that being said, I'll see you all next time.